So Mark chapter 10, I think when you're talking about the purpose of Jesus' life, and that's the other thing I've been kind of thinking about doing for a while, is just bringing some messages on the life of Christ. And when you're talking about the purpose of Christ's life, a lot of people say, well, he came to die. He came to rule. He came to be the King of Kings, Lord of Lords. I suppose there's a lot of answers to that question. But the one that seems to sum up the life of Christ more than anything is that one simple word that Mark is going to talk about a lot in this book called servant. Jesus Christ came as a servant, and the whole theme of the book of Mark is to present Christ as a servant. As I said, for some time I've been contemplating this, doing something from the Gospels. It's been a while since we just focused on the life of Jesus Christ. And if we're not careful as Christians, folks, we can become people who talk a lot about a Savior that we don't know very well. Let me say that again. If we are not careful in our Christian life, it is very easy for us to talk a lot about a Savior that we don't know very much about. And the reason we don't is because we get so used to coming to church and so used to just calling ourselves Christians and so used to doing the church thing or the Christian thing that our relationship with Jesus Christ begins to suffer. And he becomes like this family member who lives on the other side of the state, the other side of the country, or who lives down in Texas somewhere. And say, oh yeah, we're part of the same family. But we don't have that close relationship. I have two brothers in my family that one lives in California and one lives in Florida now. Now, we can't get any farther apart and still stay in the same 48 states. One of them's going to have to fall into the ocean, I guess, to get farther apart. But, we're still part of the same family. We still talk about one another from time to time. But our relationship is hampered by the miles. And because we've distanced ourselves in mileage, sadly, it's also distanced our relationship. And of course, I'm not a Facebook kind of guy and all that kind of stuff. You all know that. And so I don't really keep up on what they're doing. They really don't keep up on what I'm doing. We love each other, but not that much, okay? We're brothers, okay? And now they're our sisters. I'm sure they're all intertwined and know what everybody's doing last week and tomorrow. But guys aren't that way, okay? We're brothers. And, if we call each other once a year and get caught up, we're good, okay? And so we'll probably do that around Christmas. And last time I actually talked to my brother on a phone was last Christmas, and he had just played golf in Florida. It was 90 degrees on Christmas Day. And I think we had like 48 feet of snow that day. And it wasn't last year, I remember taking pictures by the snow drifts, and they were like this tall, okay, by the time we shoveled the 15 inches and then shoveled the next 15 that came like 2 days later. But he was sitting in his flip-flops and sandals and shorts somewhere in Florida. But because we're so far apart, we can talk a lot about each other, but we just don't know each other that well anymore. And I know a lot of people who talk a lot about Jesus, claim to be a Christian, but they know very little about the person that they say that they're following. And I would never want that to happen in this church. And so I just think it's time we kind of get back to the life of Christ and talk about Him. This series of messages I'm going to be bringing out of the Gospel of Mark, and I think the timing is good because as we enter the holiday season, the book of Mark shows Jesus in His servant role. It's really the theme of the entire book, as I said. And there are some things that we do know about this book I think are critical as we get into this study. First of all, most scholars agree that it was written by John Mark. Okay, John Mark is the same guy that traveled with Paul on his first missionary journey. If you're familiar with the book of Acts, you know that Paul wanted John Mark to travel with him. But John Mark was a little bit young in the Lord. Okay, probably young physically, but also young spiritually. And something happened on that first missionary trip. We don't know exactly what happened. Most likely, John Mark, being young, just kind of got homesick. Back in those days when you traveled the world, you were gone a long period of time. Okay, you just didn't go away to youth camp for a week. You were gone for long periods of time, especially if you were traveling with Paul on a missionary journey. And John Mark got a little bit homesick and wasn't really doing the work. In fact, Paul sent him back home and wouldn't even and refused to even take him on a second missionary trip. It's that same John Mark. But in fact, the quarrel was so bitter, as I said, that it kind of broke up the missionary team. And Paul and Silas ended up going one direction, and Barnabas then took John Mark with him some years down the road. And it was John Mark who went with Barnabas, and they became a second missionary team. It's that same John Mark who writes this book. Okay, it was not written by John, the writer of the Gospel of John, of course. This was written by Mark, John Mark. Later on, Paul would ask Timothy to bring John Mark with him to Rome because John Mark, he said, was useful to the service of Christ. It tells us that God is forgiving, doesn't it? Peter will say about John Mark, he will call him his son in the ministry in 1 Peter 5:13. Most scholars suggest that Mark and Peter had a very close relationship, that Peter actually taught Mark these things that he would write down. You can kind of get the idea that Peter, who was older, would say to John Mark, listen, I'm going to give you some things. I want you to write them down. I want you to write them accurately. I want you to be thorough about these. I'm going to tell you what it was like walking with Jesus Christ. And so many scholars suggest that Peter pretty much just transcribed this book to Mark as he wrote it down and recounted the life of Christ. We also know that this was the first gospel written. It was written around 60 to 70 A.D. You have to remember what was going on in Rome at this time. This was the height of the Roman persecution against Christians. Nero would have been ruling in Rome at that time. Of course, if you know anything about Rome or about Nero, Nero would regularly take Christians and feed them to the lions. He liked to dip them in oil and wax and place them around his garden and then light his garden. Peter was put to death during this time. It was Nero who burned down Rome and blamed the Christians for it and then used that to butcher them wholesale. The church ran for its life during this time. They were hiding in the catacombs, hiding in the rocks and the caves around Rome. It was during this time that Mark wrote his book about the life of Christ. And his purpose for writing this book was to encourage those Gentile Christians who were being persecuted and being put to death. And I find it very interesting that in a time of persecution, his instruction to the people was, let me show you how Christ dealt with persecution. He always dealt with it as a servant. He never retaliated. He never fought back. He never lost his temper. He never lost his cool. He just served others. And I think that is very significant, that we learn in the same type of situations when the suffering is going on, that if we're going to be like Christ, we have to live as servants, not as warriors, not as kings trying to take over a nation, which is what we do sometimes in our homes. Okay, we serve. We serve. And in Mark, we don't receive any long genealogies of Christ. There's no birth narrative. In fact, Kent Hughes says about this book, he says, Christ is all action in Mark. And that action is his life as a servant. The book of Mark is not a long book. You could read this book in about 2 hours. Even a slow reader could sit down and probably read the entire book in about 2 hours. Somebody once said that Mark is the go gospel, which is what servants do. They go to others in need, and they share the gospel of Christ with them. But as I was typing this message this week, and as I was contemplating this book again, it struck me how foreign this message of servitude is to really our world today. I know that oftentimes in America, we talk about how America is the most giving nation of all. We are coming upon a season where oftentimes people do think about others. We have our Coats for Kids programs. We're involved in the One Warm Coat Project, which, by the way, let me just say, Wednesday nights is the last night you can give to that. I just counted 27 coats out there. Unless some more came this morning, I counted 27 this morning, which I think is awesome. But if you still got some coats you want to donate, you can get a chance to do that, okay, up until this Wednesday, but you need to get them here by Wednesday. You know, we have our Toys for Tots. We have Operation Christmas Child, the shoebox thing, okay, that people do, and things like that. There's 100 other good projects like that all around our country. And I'm not against those things, okay? I just think that what we have done is, if we're not careful, we will equate those programs many times as servitude in our own life. And by that I mean we've convinced ourselves that if I'll go out and buy lots of toys and little game books and things like that, and I fill a shoebox, I have been a great servant of Jesus Christ. Or if I donate some coats, or if I go do something, then I've become a servant. But see, folks, servitude is not, let's fill a box and send it to somebody we've never seen and we don't know. Servitude is not giving a coat to somebody that we'll never see who wears it. Okay? Servitude is getting involved in the messy part. Getting involved in that person's life. It's so much more than just giving money to a project or taking a picture of an angel off of a tree somewhere and buying a gift and putting it back and never seeing. Servitude is getting on our hands and knees, washing the feet, washing the stripes of the person who hurts and the person who is suffering. That's what servitude is really all about. And I'm afraid in our nation, while we are a giving nation, we're not a serving nation. And there is a difference. And let's be honest, most of us, We may do something like that at Christmas time, and it makes us feel really good. But I think if we'd be honest, pretty much the rest of the year, we live for self. You know, most of us don't have a giving project every month that we're really working on, do we? You know, after Christmas is done and we've weighed, you know, we get back on the scale, and after all the food we've eaten, okay, and none of us will probably starve to death this Christmas holiday season, again, Thanksgiving and all that. I would just wish they'd spread the two out. I wish they'd put Thanksgiving like in May or something, and Christmas in December, so that we can, you know, take off a few pounds before we put it back on, so we can take off a few before we put it, you know, no, let's just lump the two biggest meals of the year within 3 weeks of each other. This is a great idea. I don't know who came up with this, but I'm just saying, okay, it's my way of thinking, you know. But, yeah, who wants to do that, right? Yeah, don't be using that D word around here. She used the word discipline. What kind of nonsense is that, right? Yeah. Did you say too much of everything?
2 bites.
Oh, 2 bites. I thought you said too much. That's what I do, too much. That's consistency. That's what I do, too much of everything. Say, I don't want to leave anything out. Yeah, but isn't it true that pretty much we live for ourselves? In fact, I have never received a phone call from anyone who ever said, "Preacher, I am so upset because people keep doing nice things for me." Yeah, I've never gotten a phone call like that. I've never gotten a phone call while sitting at the house and somebody said, "Preacher, I'm just so upset. My husband is just way too nice of a guy. You know, my wife treats me so good and I just don't know what to do about it." Okay, that's never happened to me. Instead, I get phone calls like this. "Preacher, I'm really upset because people keep doing, you know, all these mean things to me. Preacher, this person just treated me awful. My boss is the biggest scoundrel on the planet. My spouse, my kids, no one loves me. In fact, I think I'll just go eat worms." You know, isn't that true? That's usually the way we are. We are, for the most part, concerned about ourselves. We aren't looking to serve others. In fact, usually we gripe and complain when we have to be nice to somebody else, right? And we really gripe and complain when people aren't nice to us. Well, those people are so rude. What a horrible waitress. I can't believe she didn't bring our waters fast enough. That guy just cut me off the freeway. I hope he gets his. You know, God saw that. You know, kids, let's pray for that man's salvation right now. You know, and we got all mighty and spiritual about this stuff, right? Yeah. That teacher was so mean to me. I can't believe she gave me a B+ on that test. I deserved an A. I worked so hard on that. And our kids have learned from us well too. You know, how come I have to be nice to my sister? You know, why do I have to help Mom pick up the house? Why do I have to help clean the church? I didn't mess it up. You mean we got to set up chairs on a Wednesday night? What's that all about? How come I've got to help out? Why isn't life all about me? And this teaching in Mark, this presentation of Christ, is so foreign, I believe, to our culture, especially in this nation of entitlement in which we live today. There's so many people think that everything should be given to them and nothing should be worked for. And we've come to believe that everyone should be serving us instead of us doing the serving. Now, with all that said, I want to read in Mark chapter 10, begin reading in verse 35, and I want to read down through down through verse 45, and then we'll piece all this together. You say, "Brother Jeff, you know, this is an introduction. Why are we starting in chapter 10? Well, mainly because this really sets the tone for the entire book, I think. It says, "Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him, saying, 'Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask.' And he said to them, 'What do you want me to do for you?' They said to him, 'Grant us that we may sit, one on your right hand and the other on your left, in your glory.' But Jesus said to them, 'You do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?' They said to him, 'We are able.' Jesus said to them, 'You will indeed drink the cup that I drink, and with the baptism I am baptized with, you will be baptized. But to sit on my right hand and on my left is not mine to give, but is for those whom it is prepared.' And when the 10 heard it, they began to be greatly displeased with James and John. But Jesus called them to himself and said to them, 'You know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant. And whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. First thing I want us to look at a little bit this morning is the disciples' failure to really learn Jesus' servant approach. I don't think they ever got the concept of this the entire time that he was alive. I don't think they really grasped this and understood it until after he died and really even rose back again to heaven. In Mark 10, Jesus makes it clear to his disciples what his mission was. And these men now who had walked with Jesus for 3 years, Jesus is telling them, in the previous verses that we didn't read, Jesus is telling them that it's about time for us now to go to Jerusalem. When I get to Jerusalem, I'm going to be put to death. I'm going to die. I'm going to be betrayed and be crucified on a cross. And these two guys, James and John, and by the way, Matthew tells us that their mother was even involved in this, which I find kind of ironic anyway. But she's involved in this, and she actually is the one who goes to Jesus and makes this request. But they go to him, maybe thinking, well, if he's going to be dying soon, maybe we should be talking to him a little bit about kind of eternity. Where's our place going to be in all this? And so they go to him, and they ask this question in verse 35, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. Now, can you imagine if your kids came to you with that kind of request? Hey, Dad, I got a request, and do you promise to go ahead and give it to me? Now, there's not a parent in this room who would be dumb enough, I hope, to say, oh, yeah, kids, whatever you ask, Well, great. I know I'm only 9, but can I have the keys to the car? Okay, I'd like to run up to Sonic and get myself a burger. You're not going to do that. Can you hear can you sense the demanding or the sense of entitlement, I think, in this question? Hey, Jesus, we've got this idea, and we'd like for you to grant this request for us. And Jesus says to him, what is your request? Now, by the way, I know Jesus was all-knowing, but Jesus did a lot of teaching by the questions that he asked. Jesus knew what they were asking. He knew what they were getting at, and he had a lesson he wanted to teach them. But he says, what are you asking for? And as I said, Matthew tells us they got their mother to actually do the talking for them. It was his mother that actually went to him and said, I've got this request for my sons, and I'd like for you to grant this to them. We know that Peter, James, and John, by the way, I think they knew what they were doing. Peter, James, and John were kind of the inner circle. Maybe James and John and the mom were sitting at the house one day going, you know what? There's 3 of us that are closer to Jesus than all the rest. And, in heaven, Jesus only has 2 sides we can sit on, the right hand and the left side, the right hand and the left hand. And there's 3 of us. We should maybe go down and talk to Jesus and see if we can't kind of get that, ask first, see if we can't get the front seat, as opposed to the back seat. Now, your kids do that, right? Shotgun, and there's only 1 seat, and there's 4 kids, and because they can't drive yet, so there's only 1 seat, Or if you got 3 kids and you got a big sedan, you got 2 seats. You never have the same amount of kids as the seats available, right? And Mom and Dad, let me just coach you here a little bit. Don't you give up on shotgun. You ride front, all right? Put the kids in the back, and just make them get along, all right? That's the rule of the house, all right? But, and I kind of think that's what they're doing. Hey, John? Yeah, James? We want to be as close to Jesus as possible when it comes to eternity. And he already said there's not much time left. Hey, if we're going to ask about this, we need to get it in now. Let's go see if he'll grant us these 2 positions. We won't tell Peter about it. Peter's going to get ticked off when he hears about this. Peter's just that kind of a guy. So let's go and see what happens. Now, before you get too critical of these guys, let's be honest. Aren't we a lot like James and John? In our homes, on our jobs, it becomes all about us. If we aren't happy, we make sure that no one else is happy either. And when we aren't being treated right, we call all our friends and we call the preacher and we got to tell somebody how bad our life is right. The person at work got the promotion. I can't believe they got that promotion. I've been working here 4 years longer than they have, and they don't do near the work that I do. Nobody ever sees what I do, and I can't believe they got the promotion over me. What is that all about? And I've given myself to this family, and I've given myself to this spouse, and they just treat me so horrible. I will make sure everybody knows about it too, by golly. I'm calling my mother-in-law, and I'm calling my father, and I'm calling my father-in-law, and I'm calling all my sisters and brothers, and I'm going to make sure that everybody knows just how horrible my life is. Robert Raines wrote this, and I guess you would call it a poem. He writes this. He said, I am like James and John. Lord, I size up other people in terms of what they can do for me, how they can further my program, feed my ego, satisfy my needs. Give me strategic advantage. I exploit people, ostensibly for your sake, but really for my own. Lord, I turn to you to get the inside track and obtain special favors, your direction for my schemes, your power for my projects, your sanctions for my ambitions, your blank check for whatever I want. I am like James and John. Now, before we blast these guys too bad, have not we done that on occasion? We go to God in prayer. God, please give me this job promotion. I really need this job promotion. Over these other 5 people, you know I'm more qualified than anybody, God. God, I'd really appreciate it if you'd kind of smile down on me instead of those other people. You know, maybe there's some Christians in those other 5 people. But we're trying to convince God that we rank just a little bit higher than them. And if they're lost people, well, my goodness gracious, we know we rank higher, right? I mean, come on, those heathen, okay? And God, if you could just find it in your will to kind of help me get through this interview a little bit better, a little bit stronger, say the right words, because you know, God, it's all, I want this job promotion so much so that I'll give you the honor while I go impress my bosses, right? I mean, we all get that way. And deep down, it's pretty much about us. When was the last time you prayed for your spouse instead of praying about your spouse? There's a difference, right? You know, we pray about our spouses a lot. God, you know the mess that person is. Oh, my word. They are such a mess. They are so clueless. They don't have any idea what's going on. When was the last time you prayed for them? Not about them. We had I can't remember, it was 2 ladies in the church, if I remember right, that were years ago just did not get along in the church. And finally I challenged one of them in that area. I said, you know, it sounds to me like you do a lot of time praying for this lady or praying about this lady. I said, when was the last time you prayed for this lady? She said, well, what do you mean? And so I just explained it to her. I said, you're not telling God all her problems. God already knows her problems. He probably knows about some problems with her that you don't even know about. Okay? And but when was the last time you just really got in and said, God bless her? God bless her? I'm trying to get God to fix her. I know. I want you to ask God to bless her. Bless her more than He blesses you. Oh, are you serious, preacher? Yeah, I'm really serious. The dumbest thing she'd ever heard of. But fine, I'll do it. With a really good attitude, too. Okay? And that's how she left. And she went home. And I wish I could have listened in on those prayers. I wish I had a tape recorder. It would have been so fun. Because I can imagine the first one. All right, God, I'm only doing this because the preacher said I have to. But would you bless her more than you bless me? Oh, fine, I'm done with it. I'm over it. Okay? Got through that one. You know. And I challenged her to do this for like several weeks. And then she did it again. And then she did it again. She did it the 4th day. She did it the 5th day. And it took a while. I'm not saying this worked overnight, okay? It took a while, but after 2 or 3 weeks, she came back and said, you know what? I found this somewhere in there, somewhere in that little time period. I don't even know when it happened. But I found myself starting to really honestly pray that God would bless her more than He blessed me. And I began to have these feelings about her that I didn't have before. Now I actually love this person. And I didn't love him before, and now I have this love for this person. I had a lady come to us one time. She had an unsaved husband. Well, she did a lot of praying about this husband. When we challenged her to start praying for her husband, it totally changed the relationship in the home. And she began to love him in the way that Christ loved him. And it was years later before he came to Christ, but eventually he came to Christ. And he said a lot of it had to do with the fact that she just quit telling me everything I was doing wrong and what a horrible sinner I was, and she just started loving me. And she said it was several weeks into this little process before I really started to love him the way that Christ loved him. And she said, and I had no problem serving him and serving him and loving him the way the servant should. See, before we're like James and John, before we're too critical of James and John, we have to realize we're a lot like them. And oftentimes in our prayer, we're asking God to fix all the people around us so that our needs will be met, not so we can be a blessing and a servant to them. Number 2 is this. I want you to notice the Lord's rebuke of his disciples. In verse 38, Jesus says to them, he says, you don't know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink and be baptized with the baptism that I'm baptized with? And in verse 39, they said to him, hey, we're able. Again, you kind of sense the arrogancy here, or the cockiness, the pride here. You know, I think James, and again, I don't think they had a clue what Jesus was talking about. When he's talking about his baptism, when he's talking about drinking the cup, remember the prayer in the garden, God, let this cup pass from me. He's talking about his death here, okay, his suffering. And I think James turned to John and said, hey, you can drink cup? Yeah, I don't mind a good glass of water. Sure, I think we can do that. Baptism? I think we can be baptized. Yeah, no problem. Sign me up. Okay? I don't think they had a clue where Jesus was really going with this. But I think, well, yeah, we can do that. Sometimes I'll talk to people about being a Christian. And they'll go, I think I can give that up. Well, yeah, I think I can do that too. Get baptized? Sure, I can fit that in my schedule. What, third Sunday from next? Yeah, I think I can do that. Yeah, I think maybe I can do this. Sometimes I want to say, listen, are you willing to die for Jesus Christ? Oh, wow, now, preacher, now, you're stretching this a little bit here. Come on now. That's really what Jesus was asking these guys. Are you willing to die for me? And I don't think they were getting it. I think that's why they're a quick answer. I don't think they even understood that until after the Lord's Supper, until after his death and burial and resurrection. But Jesus said to him, he says, and this would have been prophetic because it was. They both did die for their faith, by the way. He says, you will indeed drink the cup that I drink, and with the baptism I am baptized with you, you will be baptized. But to sit on my right hand and on my left hand is not mine to give. I find that interesting, and there's a lot of theology built around that I won't get into. But Jesus is saying, this is for God the Father to determine, and for whom it is already prepared. It's already been determined who's going to be in that place. You see, folks, if we're going to be like Christ, it doesn't involve praise and glory. It involves humiliation and servitude. And it might even involve death. We talked a little bit about this in Sunday school, as the Antichrist is going to one day turn against Israel and chase Israel and try to destroy Israel. Many, many, many Christians will die for their faith. And we don't understand that. I mean, we have to be honest. Please don't go to heaven someday, and when you meet some of the early martyrs of the first church, don't go up to them and say, oh, boy, I tell you, I know, it was horrible when I was a Christian too. Okay? It might just bop you in the nose. All right? They'll say, let me tell you what it's like to be ripped apart by a lion that hasn't been fed in 3 weeks, and we had, they put sheep's clothing on us and sheep fur around us and then just tied us to a stake and turned the... Now, let me tell you about that. Let me tell you what it's like to be dipped in that oil and then in that wax and then be lit on fire to light some wicked kings. Don't go to heaven and tell them how bad you had it. Okay? Let's just all agree on that. Okay? Don't go to Isaiah and say, boy, Isaiah, I really had it tough. He'll say, really? Did anybody put you in a log and saw you in half? Because that's what happened to me. Just for sport. All those people who are treating you so badly, you want to be like Jesus? Start being a slave to them. Start being a servant to them. Now, I know we hate this kind of preaching. Okay? Some of you are sitting here saying, I don't like this. I would much rather hear some other kind of a message than this. Preacher, you don't understand what I'm going... I don't have to understand what you're going through. Okay? Because I've just got the words of Jesus here. In fact, down in verse 44, when he uses that word slave, the word literally means bond slave. We like to change the word slave in Scripture. We usually like to turn it to servant. Okay? It just sounds a little nicer. But literally the word slave means a bond slave, means that I give up all my rights to serve and minister to this person. That's literally what the word means here. So if you want to be like Jesus, we start serving. We don't start demanding that we get everything we want, and we act like woe is me when we don't get our way. There's a parallel passage I want you to read. Turn over to Luke here. Keep your place there in John, or Mark, because we're going to come back. But in Luke chapter 22, there's kind of a parallel passage here that, but it reads slightly different. And I want you to see this, because I think it's really neat what Jesus says here. It's really, really powerful. In Luke 22 and verse 27, Jesus asks some theological questions here. He says in verse 27, "For who is greater, he who sits at the table or he who serves? Is it not he who sits at the table? Yet I am among you as the one who serves." Now, this is a very appropriate question, even in our culture. Because let's think about it. When we go to a wedding, what do we always have at the wedding? Where the bride and groom and all those people always sit. What do we call that? The head table, right? You've heard the expression. You go to a banquet or you go to some kind of a big deal. In fact, sometimes it'll actually be on a platform and they'll have the head table. And at a wedding, in the middle of the head table are the bride and groom. Why? Because they're getting all the honor. Okay? At a wedding, who's the most honorable? Us, who are sitting in the 18th row, 4 places in? No. All eyes are focused on the bride and groom. That's cool. That's appropriate. Okay? We understand that. When you go to a restaurant, let's be honest, who do you think is the most important person in the restaurant? I am. In fact, I'll tell that steak man exactly how I want my steak. And I'm going to tell that waitress, who she's a nobody, okay? It's her job to serve me, and my food better be right, and it better be the right temperature. And by golly, if I don't get it this way, I'm going to raise a ruckus, and I'm going to send it back, and I'm just going to cause a scene, and I'm going to stomp all over the place. I used to work with a guy that would do this regularly. I found that I wouldn't go out to eat with him anymore. I couldn't handle it. He'd take the fries back at McDonald's. His cold fries are cold. He'd toss them across the counter. And I wouldn't even go out to eat with him anymore. He said, "You want to go to lunch?" I said, "No, I don't want to go to lunch." I never told him why, but he was embarrassing. I mean, I'm going to eat your stinking cold fry. You won't die. Okay, some people who dig through garbage cans to find a fry, cold or, half eaten by a mouse or something, right? But he would do that all the time. But, let's be honest, when we're in a restaurant, it's all about us. We don't really care what kind of day that waitress had. We don't care if they chewed her out of the last table. She better get our food here, and she better get it on time. And I can't believe she gave me a regular Coke instead of a Diet Coke. What is wrong with her? She's going to pay for that one. See if she gets a tip. I mean, let's be honest. And what did Jesus just say here? Who is greater, he who sits at the table or he who serves? And in every culture in our world, it's the same thing, by the way. In every culture, why, the ones at the table, they're the greatest because those servants, they're just servants and they're just serving. In fact, Jesus agrees with this. That's why he says, he says in verse 27, is it not he who sits at the table? He said, in every culture we know this. The person sitting down is the one who is the most honorable. He's the one who's greater. The servants are serving, okay? But listen what Jesus says. Yet I am among you as the one who serves. Now, let this sink in and let it blow your mind for just a little bit, okay? Let it blow your mind the way it did the disciples. Here's Jesus saying, I am willingly among you as the one who serves. I'll be honest, this kind of messes up my mind a little bit. Jesus is saying, I, the one who created the sun, the moon, and the stars, the one who created all the supernovas, the Milky Way, and the galaxies, the one who created all the little one-cell organisms and all the molecules and the nucleuses and the atoms and all those kinds of things, and the one who even wrote your DNA. He says, if I can become a servant, you can become a servant. So I'm not asking you to do something that I haven't already done myself. I don't know about you, but that knocks me down a few notches. When you go to a restaurant this afternoon and the waitress isn't perfect, I hope you'll remember this. What if we served her? What if we were a blessing to her? You ever thought about that? You ever thought about how you could be a blessing to the waitress? Preacher, she's just a waitress. Why would I even ask her about her day? I mean, she's friendly to me. How was your day? How was your services? That's great. So glad you came. Thank you for coming back. Preacher, why? She's just the waitress. What about being a servant to her? You want to blow her mind? I doubt if any of you will do this today, but I might now because you guys are type that like to take on challenges. Try doing this, though, at the restaurant today. The waitress gets there and she says, can I take your order, please? What would you like? You say, tell you what, why don't you sit down right here and join us for dinner? In fact, we'll feed you, and we're going to pay for your meal. Of course, you know what she'd do. Oh, I can't do that. I'll get fired and everything. Why not? Well, I'll go talk to your boss. You know, she's been working really hard here. Can we buy her lunch later today? Can we just go ahead and pay for it? Give her the best steak in the house. And would you guys make it just the way she wants it? Give her the biggest baked potato. And we want to pay for her meal before we leave. Some of you are looking at me like I just lost my gizzard or something. Okay, this guy has stepped off the deep end. You know, or when you write that tip, don't get out your calculator and go, okay, 15%, exactly 15%. I'll leave her a tip of $2.83. Okay. Yeah. No amens here. No amens here. Okay. You know what some people do? Nope, 283. Don't you dare leave 284. She wasn't that good. Only 283. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And some of you go, okay, brother preacher, I'll kill the big one. I'll bump it up to $3. Okay. And you're already under 15% anyway because you're cheap. Okay. I'm just saying. So, what about just, sure about the guy? I don't know who it was. Somebody this past week gave some waitress a $10,000 tip. I'm going, this gal's having a good Christmas. Okay. She couldn't wait to get back to work the next day. Now, you don't have to give a $10,000 tip today. Okay. If you do, I'll come and serve you your food. Okay. I'll be there to help you. But why not just kick it up a notch? Double it. Whatever you paid for lunch, just double it. Okay? If it costs you $25, give her a $25 tip. Preacher, I couldn't do that. She's just a lowly waitress. Come on, isn't that where our brain goes? Now, you can do whatever you want to do. I'm not trying to put you on a guilt trip, okay? I'm just saying that if we're going to learn to serve, really be like Christ, we have to have this servant attitude. Notice the reaction from the other disciples. Boy, isn't this common. And I'll get through this pretty quick here, because I've already talked about the other verses anyway. Going back to Mark 10. And when the 10 heard it, the other 10 disciples, they became greatly displeased with James and John. Well, there's an understatement of the year. Don't you get ticked when somebody else gets the blessing and you don't? Now, we've already talked about this a little bit, but it ticks them off. Why? Because their reasoning was, why didn't we think of this first? Why didn't we think to ask for that special spot in heaven? And how come it's not fair if they get it? What about us? And usually, when something like this happens, other people are upset. What is your reaction when you're around somebody who thinks that the world owes them everything? Like your kids, okay? Or somebody else, Well, everybody should just give me what I want and do everything. Don't you get frustrated by that? Don't you get a little bit angry by that? It wears on you a little bit? Or do you like being around somebody who sits around and barks orders all day and makes demands, expects special treatment? One of the first jobs I ever had was at a place called Lumber City. It was in Southern California. And at Lumber City, the bosses, it was you went to the far corner of the store and you walked up some stairs up to some upper offices that has these big old windows in them. And you could see into the windows and you could see the bosses sitting up there. Now, hopefully they've rearranged this a little bit. But they would sit up there and it was like from this area where they would watch. And if you weren't doing their job, they'd come marching down the stairs. Boom, 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 boom. They'd come out there and say, Jeff, you're not supposed to do that way. You need to make sure you fix that. So, yes, sir. Okay. And he'd go back up to his little loft again and watch some more. Okay. There'd be like 3 of them up there. And you never saw them doing any work. But they were up there, by golly. I don't know if they used little binoculars or what, checking us out. But in that store, nobody liked the bosses. Just saying. Okay. I guess they were kind of nice people, and they barked at you nicely, but they still barked. And they never did. That's why I like what Jesus said here. I came to serve. You want to be like me? You serve. And that's what Jesus was teaching there in those last few verses. Of course, verse 45 could be the theme of this entire book. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served. Even the Son of Man, the one who represents all humanity, who created all humanity, he didn't come to be served, but to serve. And to give his life, if need be, a ransom for many. Jesus makes it clear here, if you want to make a difference, you serve. You serve others. And that's how you become like Christ. Not by demanding your way, but by serving others. Let's bow our heads this morning.